Sometimes a man's worst nightmare isn't what might happen to him. It's what's already happening, and he can't remember how it started. Luke Mercer had always been the kind of cowboy who could handle anything the harsh frontier threw at him. But the brown lumps covering his face were beyond anything he'd ever faced. Doc Harrison took one look at the strange growths, and his hand started shaking. The infection was spreading fast, and Luke had no memory of the past 3 days. Soon he began seeing flashes of places he'd never been: an old government building hidden in the desert, the same building that had been abandoned since the Cold War. Something terrible had happened there long ago. But how was it connected to what was growing on his face? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Three Pines as Luke Mercer sat on the edge of Doc Harrison's examination table, his weathered hands gripping the sides with white knuckles. At 38, Luke had spent more than half his life working ranches across the Southwest, and his body bore the honest scars of that labor rope burns on his palms, a crooked finger from a bronc that had thrown him sideways, and the kind of deep tan that came from years under an unforgiving sun. But nothing in those hard-earned years had prepared him for what was happening to his face. The brown lumps clustered along his left cheek and jawline looked like nothing Doc Harrison had encountered in 4 decades of frontier medicine. They weren't pustules or boils. They had a different texture entirely, almost leathery, and they seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, independent of Luke's heartbeat. The largest one, just below his cheekbone, was the size of a silver dollar and growing darker by the hour. "Luke, I need you to tell me everything you remember about the past week," Doc Harrison said, his voice carefully controlled as he adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. The old physician had delivered half the babies in Three Pines and set more broken bones than he cared to count. But his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his medical bag. "Been working Tom Hartwell's spread up north of town," Luke replied, his voice hoarse. "Same as always. We were moving cattle down from the high pastures before the weather turns." He paused, pressing his fingers gently against the lumps. They felt warm, almost hot to the touch, but I can't remember anything. After Wednesday evening. "Today's Saturday, you say?" Doc Harrison nodded grimly. "Tom brought you in this morning. Said he found you wandering near the ranch house at dawn, looking like you'd been riding hard for days. Your horse was lathered and spooked something fierce." Luke's memory felt like looking through fog. He could recall Wednesday clearly enough helping Tom repair a section of fence line, sharing coffee and conversation around the evening fire, bedding down in the bunkhouse under a canopy of stars. After that, nothing but darkness punctuated by strange flashes of images that made no sense. Concrete corridors, the smell of antiseptic and fear, voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones about specimens and protocols. The examination room door opened with a soft creak, and Sheriff Maria Santos stepped inside. At 42, Maria had been keeping the peace in Three Pines for the better part of a decade, ever since she'd returned from her service with the Border Patrol. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, but her dark eyes missed nothing, and her reputation for fairness and competence extended well beyond the county lines. "Afternoon, Luke," she said, touching the brim of her hat. "Doc Harrison called me over. Thought I should take a look at what's troubling you. Not sure there's much law enforcement can do about a medical condition." "Sheriff," Luke said, attempting a wan smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maria studied the lumps with the same careful attention she'd give to evidence at a crime scene. "Maybe not, but 3 missing days strikes me as worth investigating. Tom says this isn't like you. You've never been one to go off on a bender or disappear without word." It was true. In the 5 years Luke had worked for Tom Hartwell, He built a reputation for reliability that was worth more than gold in ranch country. Tom's Lazy H spread covered nearly 10,000 acres of high desert country, running cattle and quarter horses with the kind of operation that demanded trust between employer and hand. Tom was getting on in years, pushing 70, and had come to depend on Luke for everything from veterinary work to handling the business end of cattle sales. Tom's worried sick, Maria continued. Says you're the best hand he's ever employed. And that's saying something for a man who's been ranching since before statehood. Luke felt a surge of gratitude toward the old rancher who'd taken him on when he drifted into Three Pines 5 years ago with little more than his horse, his gear, and a willingness to work hard. Tom had never pried into Luke's past, accepting him based on his character and ability rather than his history. It was a kindness that Luke had never forgotten. I wish I could tell you what happened, Luke said. It's like those 3 days just got carved out of my head with a knife. Doc Harrison finished his examination and stepped back, removing his gloves with deliberate care. Luke, I'm going to be straight with you. In 40 years of practice, I've never seen anything quite like this. The lumps appear to be some kind of growth, but they don't match any infection or disease process I'm familiar with. They're warm. To the touch, they seem to have their own blood supply. And he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. They appear to be growing. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Luke had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the morning air coming through the window. There's something else, Doc Harrison continued, reaching into his desk drawer and pulling out a small leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth by years of handling, and the pages were filled with his careful script. I've been keeping records of unusual cases for most of my career. Started it back in medical school as a way to track rare conditions. He flipped through several pages before stopping at an entry near the back. This was 8 years ago. A prospector named Jim Cawley came in with similar symptoms, brown lumps on his neck and arms. No memory of how he got them. What happened to him? Maria asked. He disappeared 3 days after I examined him. Never found so much as a trace of him or his gear. Doc Harrison closed the journal with a soft thump. There have been others over the years. Always the same pattern, mysterious lumps, missing memories, and then they vanish without explanation. Luke felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many others? 5 that I can document. Probably more before I started keeping detailed records. The old doctor met Luke's eyes. They all had one thing in common besides the symptoms. They'd all mentioned seeing things, places they'd never been, people they'd never met, but vivid as real memories. As if summoned by the doctor's words, another flash struck Luke's consciousness. He saw himself walking down a long corridor lined with metal doors, each bearing a small window. The air tasted of chemicals and desperation. Somewhere in the distance, machinery hummed with ominous purpose. The vision was so real, he could smell the antiseptic and hear the echo of his footsteps on polished floors. Luke? Maria's voice seemed to come from far away. You all right there? He blinked, finding both the sheriff and the doctor watching him with concern. Just had another one of those flashes. It was a hallway, like in a hospital or maybe a government building. Very clean, very sterile. And I got the feeling I wasn't supposed to be there. Maria exchanged a meaningful glance with Doc Harrison. Luke, I want you to think carefully. In that vision, did you see any signs, any markings that might help identify where it was? Luke closed his eyes, trying to recapture the details. There was a symbol on the wall like an eagle, but different, more angular. And numbers on the doors, but I can't quite... He stopped, opening his eyes wide. There was a window at the end of the hall. Outside, I could see red rock formations, like the canyons north of town. The two exchanged another look, This one, laden with significance that Luke couldn't interpret. "Sheriff," Doc Harrison said quietly, "I think you should tell him about the old facility." Maria sighed, settling into the chair beside the examination table. "Luke, about 20 miles north of here, up in the Sangre de Cristo canyons, there's an old government installation. Built back in the 50s during the Cold War, officially decommissioned in the 70s. Local folks know about it, but most of us try not to think about it too hard." "What kind of facility?" "The kind they don't put on maps," Maria replied. "Officially, it was a communications relay station. Unofficially, well, there were always rumors about research being conducted there. Biological research. The kind that made people nervous." Luke's pocket watch, a silver timepiece that had belonged to his father, began ticking erratically against his chest. The sound was subtle, but in the quiet examination room, it seemed unnaturally loud. When he pulled it out to check the time, the hands were spinning wildly, unable to settle on any particular hour. "That's peculiar," Doc Harrison observed, studying the watch's behavior. "Luke, hold that closer to the lumps." As Luke moved the watch near his affected cheek, the ticking became more pronounced, almost frantic. The hands spun faster, and the case itself grew warm in his palm. "Well, I'll be damned," the doctor muttered. "It's like they're responding to the metal." Luke pocketed the watch quickly, disturbed by its strange behavior. The timepiece had been his most treasured possession since his father's death, a constant reminder of the man who'd raised him with steady hands and quiet wisdom. Seeing it malfunction felt like losing another piece of his past. "Sheriff, I need to ask you something," Luke said. "Those people who disappeared, did anyone ever investigate their connection to that government facility?" Maria's expression grew troubled. "Luke, I've been law enforcement in this county for 10 years, and I've learned there are some questions that don't lead anywhere productive. Every time someone's brought up the facility in connection with strange happenings, they've been told politely, but firmly, to focus their attention elsewhere. By who? People who dress too well for 3 Pines and drive cars with government plates." Maria stood, adjusting her gun belt. "But that doesn't mean I haven't kept my own records, off the books. And it doesn't mean I won't help you figure out what happened to those 3 days, even if it leads us places we might not want to go." Doc Harrison was already reaching for his prescription pad. "Luke, I'm going to give you something for the pain and to help with any infection, though I doubt traditional antibiotics will be much use. I want you to come back tomorrow so I can monitor the progression of these lumps. And if you have any more of those visions, write down everything you can remember. Details matter." As Luke prepared to leave, Doc Harrison's journal caught his eye again. "Doc, would you mind if I looked through that journal? Maybe there's something in those other cases that could help." The old physician hesitated, then handed over the worn book. "Knowledge is the only weapon we have against the unknown. Luke, take it, but be careful. Sometimes knowing the truth comes with a price." Luke tucked the journal inside his jacket, feeling its weight against his ribs like a stone. Outside, 3 Pines was settling into its afternoon rhythm, storekeepers sweeping their front steps, children playing in the dusty lots between buildings, and the ever-present sound of wind moving through the cottonwoods that gave the town its name. It was a scene of peaceful normalcy that seemed at odds with the growing certainty that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. As he walked toward the hitching post where his horse waited, Luke caught sight of his reflection in the barbershop window. The lumps had grown noticeably larger since morning, their dark surface now showing a network of fine lines that looked almost like circuitry. Whatever was happening to him was accelerating, and time was becoming a luxury he couldn't afford. The ride back to the Lazy H spread gave Luke time to think, but thinking only deepened his unease. His horse, a dependable bay gelding named Copper, had been his constant companion for 3 years. Yet today, the animal shied away from him, ears pinned back and nostrils flaring with distress. Every few minutes, Copper would sidestep and snort, as if trying to escape from something only he could sense. "Easy, boy," Luke murmured, stroking the horse's neck with a gloved hand. But even his own voice sounded strange to his ears, carrying an undertone he didn't recognize. The lumps on his face had begun to weep a clear fluid that dried to a crystalline residue on his skin. When he dabbed at it with his bandana, the cloth came away stained with something that looked like water, but felt oily between his fingers. The smell was indescribable, not unpleasant exactly, but utterly foreign, like nothing that belonged to the natural world. As he crested the ridge that overlooked Tom Hartwell's ranch house, Luke spotted the old man waiting on the front porch, his weathered face creased with worry. Tom had built the Lazy H from nothing over 40 years, transforming raw desert into productive grazing land through sheer determination and intimate knowledge of the harsh country. He was the kind of man who'd seen everything the frontier had to offer, but as Luke approached, he could see genuine fear in the rancher's eyes. "How'd it go with Doc Harrison?" Tom called out as Luke dismounted. "Not good," Luke replied, securing Copper to the hitching post. The horse immediately moved to the far end of his tether, as far from Luke as the rope would allow. "He's never seen anything like it." Tom nodded grimly. "Figured as much." "Luke, there's something I need to tell you, and you're not going to like it." He gestured toward the porch steps. "Found something in your saddlebags this morning when I was checking your gear." Luke frowned. "What kind of something?" Instead of answering, Tom handed him a manila folder, its edges singed and blackened as if it had been pulled from a fire. The paper inside was partially destroyed, but Luke could make out enough text to send ice through his veins. The document bore an official seal he didn't recognize, but his name was clearly visible at the top of the page, along with a date from 3 days ago. "Subject designation L47. Luke read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Initial exposure. Successful. Memory suppression protocol activated. Subject demonstrates enhanced physical response to stimuli. Recommend immediate extraction for Phase 2 evaluation." The words made no sense, yet they filled him with a dread so profound it felt like drowning. His hand shook as he turned the charred page, revealing fragments of what appeared to be medical charts and test results, all bearing his name, all dated during his missing 3 days. "Tom, I swear to you, I have no memory of how this got in. My gear." The old rancher studied Luke's face with the same careful attention he'd used to evaluate livestock at auction. After a long moment, he nodded. "I believe you, son. But that doesn't change the fact that someone wanted you to have it or wanted someone else to find it." Luke sank into one of the porch chairs, the document trembling in his hands. The implications were staggering. Someone had taken him, conducted experiments on him, suppressed his memories, and then returned him to his normal life with evidence of their activities hidden in his belongings. But who would do such a thing, and why? As if in response to his thoughts, another vision struck with the force of a physical blow. He was strapped to a metal table in a room filled with monitoring equipment. Figures in white coats moved around him, their faces hidden behind surgical masks and protective eyewear. One of them, a woman with silver hair, was injecting something into his arm while speaking in a voice too low to understand. "Luke!" Tom's voice cut through the vision like a knife. "Luke, you're bleeding." Luke touched his nose and his fingers came away red. The nosebleed was minor, but it coincided with the vision in a way that suggested they weren't random hallucinations. Somehow, his mind was accessing suppressed memories, and the effort was taking a physical toll. "I'm remembering things," Luke said, wiping away the blood. "Things that were done to me during those missing days. Tom, I think someone took me to that old government facility in the canyons." Tom's face went pale. "Luke, You need to be very careful about what you say regarding that place. There are people who don't appreciate curiosity about Cold War installations." "What? Do you know about it?" The old rancher was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old secrets. "More than I should, less than I'd like. My daddy worked construction when they built it back in '54. Government contract. Good money. But they had to sign papers saying they'd never talk about what they saw out there." "Did he ever tell you anything?" "Not directly. But he drank, too. Much after that job was finished, and sometimes when he'd had enough whiskey, he'd mutter about things that weren't right. Laboratories built 2 deep, lead-lined rooms, and delivery trucks that arrived in the middle of the night carrying cargo that didn't belong in any communications facility." Luke studied the burned document again, trying to decipher more of the damaged text. One phrase caught his attention: viral enhancement protocol. The words meant nothing to him, but they filled him with an inexplicable sense of dread. "Tom, I need to ride out to that facility. I need to see it for myself." "Like how you do?" Tom's response was immediate and emphatic. "Luke, you're like a son to me, but I won't have you disappearing again. Whatever happened to you out there, it's not finished. Those lumps on your face, they're not getting better. They're changing you into something else." It was true. Luke could feel the changes accelerating. His hearing had become preternaturally acute. He could hear Tom's heartbeat, the scurrying of mice in the barn, even the distant sound of cattle lowing on the far pastures. His vision, too, had sharpened to an almost painful degree. In the gathering dusk, he could make out details that should have been invisible. The individual leaves on trees half a mile away, the precise pattern of scales on a lizard basking on a distant rock. "There's more," Luke said quietly. "The changes aren't just physical. I'm seeing things, hearing things. And the document suggests this is only the beginning of whatever they started." Tom stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the porch. "Luke, 40 years ago, I was a different man. Younger, more curious, less wise. I heard stories about that facility, and I decided to take a look for myself. Rode up there one night and got closer than anyone should have. What did you see? Lights where there shouldn't be any. Vehicles moving in and out of what was supposed to be an abandoned installation. And people—" Tom paused, his knuckles white as he gripped the porch railing. People who moved like they weren't entirely human anymore. The weight of Tom's revelation settled over them like a shroud. Luke looked at the burned document again, understanding now that he was part of something much larger and more sinister than a simple medical mystery. "Tom, if they took me once, they'll come for me again. Whatever they started, they'll want to finish it. Then we need to be ready for them," Tom replied, his voice carrying the steel that had helped him carve a ranch from the wilderness. "And we need help. Sheriff Santos is a good woman, but this is bigger than local law enforcement can handle." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of an approaching vehicle reached their enhanced hearing long before it should have been audible. To normal ears, Luke's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip as a black sedan crested the hill and turned toward the ranch house. The car moved too slowly for a casual visitor, its occupants clearly surveying the property as they approached. When it finally stopped 50 yards from the house, 2 men emerged, both wearing dark suits despite the desert heat, both carrying themselves with the rigid posture of military or law enforcement personnel. "Gentlemen," the taller of the 2 called out, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "We're with the Department of Health and Human Services. We need to speak with Luke Mercer regarding a potential exposure incident." Luke felt the lumps on his face grow warm, almost hot, as if responding to the presence of these men. His enhanced senses detected the metallic scent of weapons beneath their jackets, and something else, a chemical odor that triggered a flash of memory, so vivid it nearly knocked him from his chair. The same smell had filled the laboratory where they'd conducted their experiments. These weren't health officials. They were the people who had taken him, and now they had come back to finish what they'd started. Luke's hand remained steady on his weapon as the two men approached the porch, but his enhanced senses were screaming warnings. The chemical odor grew stronger. With each step they took antiseptic mixed with something else, something that made his skin crawl with recognition. "Mr. Mercer," the taller agent said, pulling out an identification wallet. "I'm Agent Davidson. This is Agent Torres. We understand you've been experiencing some health issues that may be related to environmental contamination in the area." Tom stepped protectively closer to Luke. "What kind of contamination?" "The classified kind," Agent Torres replied, his eyes never leaving Luke's face. Luke noticed the man's pupils were dilated despite the bright afternoon sun, and there was something mechanical about the way he moved, as if his joints didn't quite work like normal human anatomy. "We're going to need Mr. Mercer to come with us for medical evaluation and possible treatment," Davidson continued. "This is for his own safety, as well as the safety of the community." "I've already seen a doctor," Luke said, his voice carefully controlled. "Doc Harrison examined me this morning." Davidson's smile was cold and professional. "I'm afraid Dr. Harrison isn't equipped to handle this type of contamination. We have specialists who understand exactly what you're dealing with." The lumps on Luke's face began to pulse more rapidly, and he could feel heat building beneath his skin. His pocket watch started its erratic ticking again, the sound audible even to Tom's normal hearing. Whatever was happening to him was reacting to these men's presence in a way that felt distinctly like a threat response. "Luke's not going anywhere with you boys," Tom declared, his own hand moving to rest on the shotgun he kept propped beside the door. "Not until you can produce proper paperwork and explain exactly what kind of contamination you're talking about." Agent Torres tilted his head with that same mechanical precision. "Mr. Hartwell, I wouldn't advise interfering with a federal health investigation. The consequences could be quite severe for you and your property." "That sounds an awful lot like a threat, Agent Torres." "It's a statement of fact." Torres reached inside his jacket, and Luke's enhanced reflexes kicked in. He could see the movement, as if it were happening in slow motion, could track the exact trajectory of the man's hand toward what was certainly a weapon. "Tom, get down," Luke shouted, rolling off the porch as Torres's gun cleared leather. The shot went wild, splintering the wooden railing where Luke had been sitting a heartbeat earlier. Tom's shotgun boomed in response, and Torres staggered backward, dark fluid spreading across his white shirt. But instead of falling, the agent straightened up with that same unnatural movement, his wound already beginning to close with a wet, sucking sound. "Jesus Christ," Tom breathed, working the shotgun's action to chamber another shell. Luke was already moving, his enhanced speed carrying him behind the water trough as Davidson opened fire with a weapon that sounded more like a nail gun than a traditional firearm. The projectiles struck the metal trough with sharp pings, and Luke caught a glimpse of them in the late afternoon sun, not bullets, but dart-like objects designed to deliver some kind of payload. "Luke," Tom called out. "The barn." "Get to the bar." But Luke was beyond rational thought now. The heat building beneath his skin had become a furnace, and the lumps on his face were spreading, new growths erupting along his neck and arms with painful intensity. Whatever these agents represented, his body recognized them as a mortal threat and was responding accordingly. He vaulted over the trough and charged Davidson with speed that defied human limitations. The agent's eyes widened with something that might have been satisfaction as Luke closed the distance, but Luke was beyond caring about their reactions. His fist connected with Davidson's jaw with a sound like breaking wood, and the man flew backward into his vehicle's windshield. Torres raised his weapon again, But Tom's second shotgun blast caught him center mass, spinning him around. This time, the agent stayed down, his body twitching with mechanical spasms that had nothing to do with normal death throes. "Luke." Tom's voice seemed to come from far away. "Luke, we need to get out of here. There'll be more of them coming." Luke looked down at his hands and nearly vomited. His fingers were elongating, the bones stretching and reshaping themselves. The skin was taking on a rough, bark-like texture, and he could feel similar changes occurring throughout his body. Whatever they had done to him was accelerating, triggered by the violence and stress of the encounter. Davidson was pulling himself upright against his vehicle, his jaw hanging at an impossible angle. When he spoke, his voice was distorted, but still intelligible. "Phase 2 activation confirmed," he said into a radio device. "Subject demonstrates enhanced physical capabilities. Recommend immediate containment protocols." Tom appeared at Luke's side, the smoking shotgun in his hands. "Son, we need to move now." But Luke was transfixed by his reflection in the sedan's side mirror. The lumps had spread across most of his face and neck, forming intricate patterns that looked almost like circuit boards etched in living flesh. His eyes had changed too. The irises now showed flecks of metallic silver that caught the light like polished steel. "What's happening to me, Tom?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out." Tom grabbed Luke's transformed arm, seemingly unafraid of the changes. "First, though, we need to get somewhere safe. I know a place, an old line shack up in the high country. Nobody's used it in 20 years. The sound of approaching vehicles reached their enhanced hearing, at least 3, maybe 4, coming fast from different directions. Luke's body was still changing, muscles expanding and restructuring themselves in ways that should have been agonizing but instead felt strangely natural, as if he were finally becoming what he was meant to be. "Tom, you should run. Get to Sheriff Santos. Tell her what happened here. I'm not sure I can control what's happening to me." "Like hell I'm leaving you." Tom shouldered a pack he'd grabbed from inside the house. "Your family, Luke, has been since the day you rode onto my land. We stick together." Davidson was speaking into his radio again, his broken jaw making the words slurred but understandable. "Subject has departed initial containment zone with civilian asset. Recommend full activation of perimeter teams. Authorization for lethal force if necessary to protect operational security." Luke heard every word with crystalline clarity, his enhanced senses now operating at levels that seemed impossible. He could detect the approaching vehicles by their engine signatures, 3 black sedans and something larger, possibly military. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the net closed. Around them, the high country it is, Luke agreed, swinging up onto Copper's back with fluid grace despite his ongoing transformation. The horse no longer shied away from him. Instead, Copper seemed to understand that whatever Luke was becoming, he was still the same man who had cared for him with patient kindness. As they rode hard toward the distant mountains, Luke caught one last glimpse of the ranch house that had been his home for 5 years. Already, it seemed like a memory from someone else's life, a peaceful interlude before the real story began. Behind them, the government vehicles converged on the Lazy H like vultures drawn to carrion, but they found only an empty ranch and 2 agents whose failure would have consequences that reached far beyond the high desert of New Mexico. The old line shack perched on a narrow ledge 20 miles into the high country, accessible only by a treacherous trail that wound through broken rock and stunted pine. Tom had built it decades ago as a shelter for riders caught in the sudden storms that swept down from the peaks, and it had the virtue of being invisible from the valley floor. Luke's transformation continued as they climbed toward the refuge. His hearing now extended far beyond human range. He could detect the heartbeats of small animals in the brush, the whispered conversations of their pursuers miles below, even the electrical hum of surveillance equipment being deployed throughout. The region. Tom, they're setting up a perimeter, he said as they finally reached the shack. Electronic surveillance, vehicle checkpoints, maybe aircraft. They're treating this like a military operation. Tom unsaddled the horses with practiced efficiency, his weathered hands steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. Then we need to think like soldiers instead of ranchers. What do you know about the enemy's capabilities? Luke closed his eyes, trying to process the flood of sensory information his enhanced nervous system was providing. The agents we fought, they weren't entirely human. Torres took a shotgun blast that should have killed him instantly, but he was still moving. And Davidson, his jaw was shattered, but he was still able to communicate. Enhanced like you? Different. My changes feel organic. Natural. Theirs seemed mechanical, artificial. Luke examined his hands in the fading light. The bark-like texture of his skin was becoming more pronounced, and he could see veins of metallic silver threading through the organic material like circuitry. I think they're trying to create different types of enhanced humans for different purposes. Tom lit a small fire in the shack's stone hearth, keeping the flames low to avoid creating visible smoke. We need information, Luke. We need to understand what was done to you and why. As if summoned by their need, a new voice called from outside the shack. Hello in there. Don't shoot. I'm a friend. Luke's enhanced senses immediately identified the speaker as female. Middle-aged, carrying no weapons, but radiating an intensity that spoke of deep purpose. Tom kept his shotgun ready as a woman emerged from the darkening forest. Her hands raised to show peaceful intent. She was perhaps 50 years old, with steel-gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that held the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. Her clothing was practical hiking boots, jeans, and a field jacket that had seen years of use. My name is Elena Vasquez, she said. I'm the librarian in Three Pines, and I've been tracking the activities at the old facility for 15 years. Tom lowered his weapon slightly. How did you find us? I've been monitoring government communications since they increased their activity in the region 3 days ago. When I heard about the incident at your ranch, I knew they'd come for Luke. Eventually, Elena stepped into the circle of firelight, her gaze focusing on Luke's transformed features with scientific curiosity rather than fear. I also knew he'd need information to survive what's happening to him. Luke studied her carefully. His enhanced senses detected no deception, only a deep well of determination and what felt like guilt. You know about the facility. More than anyone else who's still breathing, Elena replied grimly. I used to work there, back in the 70s. I was young, idealistic, and I believed we were doing important research for national security. Tom added more wood to the fire. What kind of research? Elena settled onto a wooden crate that served as a chair, her expression growing distant. The official program was called Project Prometheus. The goal was to create enhanced human beings, capable of surviving and operating in environments hostile to normal human physiology, radiation zones, chemical contamination areas, extreme temperatures. Biological warfare, Luke said quietly. That's what I eventually realized. We weren't creating super soldiers to protect America. We were creating weapons that could be deployed in any environment against any enemy. Elena reached into her field jacket and pulled out a rolled bundle of papers. These are the original facility blueprints. The installation extends 12 levels underground, with laboratories, containment facilities, and something they called the Genesis Chamber. Luke unrolled the papers, his enhanced vision allowing him to read the technical drawings even in the flickering firelight. The scope of the underground complex was staggering, easily 10 times larger than what was visible from the surface. Elena, if you worked there, you must know what they did to me. The virus they exposed you to is called Chimera 7. It's designed to rewrite human DNA at the cellular level, incorporating genetic material from organisms that have evolved enhanced survival capabilities. The brown lumps you first experienced were actually chrysalis structures. Your body was literally rebuilding itself from the inside out. Tom poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night air. How many people have they done this to? Hundreds over the decades, but Luke is different. Elena's eyes met his across the fire. The virus in previous subjects was unstable. It would enhance them temporarily before burning out their nervous systems. They develop incredible abilities for weeks or months, then die in agony as their brains literally cooked from the inside. Luke felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What makes me different? You're not their first success, but you may be their first stable success. The genetic markers they've been tracking suggest your body is adapting to the virus rather than being consumed by it. Elena pulled out a small device that looked like a modified Geiger counter. May I? Luke nodded, and Elena activated the device, pointing it toward him. The instrument immediately began clicking rapidly, its display showing readings that made Elena's eyebrows rise. Your cellular activity is off the charts, but it's not chaotic. There's a pattern, a rhythm to it. That's what they've been trying to achieve for decades: controlled enhancement rather than destructive mutation. Tom stood abruptly, walking to the shack's single window. Elena, if Luke is their success story, they're not going to let him go. They'll hunt him to the ends of the earth to study what makes him different, which is why we need to get to the facility before they relocate their research, Elena replied. Luke's transformation is entering a critical phase. Without access to the stabilization treatments they've developed, his body could still burn out. It will just take longer. Luke felt the truth of her words in his bones. The changes were accelerating again, and with them came a growing sense of urgency, as if some internal clock was counting down toward an irreversible deadline. How long do I have? Based on the readings I'm seeing? Maybe 72 hours before you either stabilize permanently or begin the final burnout phase. The weight of that deadline settled over the three of them like a shroud. 72 hours to infiltrate a heavily defended government facility, locate the treatment Luke needed, and somehow escape with their lives. There's something else, Elena continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. The facility isn't as abandoned as they want people to believe. I've been monitoring their communications for years, and 3 days ago, activity spiked to levels I haven't seen since the project was supposedly shut down. Luke's enhanced hearing picked up the distant sound of helicopters, at least 2, possibly 3, conducting search patterns across the high country. Their pursuers were getting closer, and the window for action was closing rapidly. Elena, in those blueprints, is there a way into the facility that doesn't involve the main entrance? She smiled grimly and pointed to a section of the drawings. Emergency ventilation system installed during the original construction. It connects to a natural cave system about 2 miles north of the main complex. The opening is hidden, but I can guide you to it. Tom returned from the window, his expression grim. We've got company coming up the trail. 3 vehicles, moving. Slow but steady. They'll be here within the hour. Luke stood, testing his transformed body's capabilities. The changes had stabilized somewhat, leaving him stronger, faster, and more resilient than any human had a right to be, but still recognizably himself. The bark-like texture of his skin had hardened into something approaching armor, while the silver veins provided what felt like an internal communication network that enhanced his coordination and reaction time. Then we move now, he decided. Elena, can you guide us to that cave entrance in the dark? I've made the trip dozens of times over the years. I know every rock and route between here and there. Tom gathered their supplies with military efficiency. Luke, you need to understand something. Once we do this, there's no going back. They'll never stop hunting us, and anyone who helps us becomes a target. Luke looked at the older man who had become like a father to him, seeing the resolve in Tom's weathered features despite the danger. "Tom, you don't have to. Boy, I told you before your family. That means we face whatever comes together." Elena was already shouldering her pack, the facility blueprints secured in a waterproof case. "There's a service tunnel that will take us directly to the main laboratory level. If the stabilization equipment is anywhere, it will be there." As they prepared to leave the shack, Luke caught sight of his reflection in the window glass one more time. The man looking back at him was still recognizable, but changed in fundamental ways. His eyes now glowed with a soft silver light, and the patterns traced across his skin pulsed with their own bioluminescence. Whatever he was becoming, he was running out of time to control the process. The facility held the key to his survival, but getting there alive would require every advantage his enhanced abilities could provide. The helicopters were getting closer, their searchlights beginning to probe the forest canopy. In the distance, he could hear the government vehicles grinding their way up the mountain trail, their occupants no doubt equipped with the same kind of enhanced capabilities that had made Torres and Davidson so difficult to kill. "Time to go," Elena whispered, leading them into the darkness of the high country forest. Behind them, the line shack that had provided temporary refuge was already being forgotten, another waypoint in a journey that was taking Luke further from his old life. With each step, the cave entrance was little more than a crack in the rock face, hidden behind a curtain of twisted pine roots and decades of accumulated debris. Elena led them through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had made this journey many times, her flashlight beam revealing a passage that opened into a natural limestone cavern large enough to stand upright. "The government never mapped this part of the cave system," Elena explained as they moved deeper underground. They were so focused on their official construction that they missed the natural access points. Luke's enhanced senses were overwhelmed by the cave environment. He could hear water dripping dozens of levels below, feel the subtle air currents that spoke of vast chambers extending in all directions, and detect the scent of something that definitely didn't belong in a natural cave. System industrial lubricants, electronic components, and the sterile smell of a laboratory. "We're close," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded, consulting a hand-drawn map by flashlight. The service tunnel should intersect with this cavern system about half a mile ahead. "But Luke, there's something you need to know before we go any further." Tom, who had been bringing up the rear with his shotgun at the ready, moved closer. "What kind of something?" Elena's expression was troubled in the harsh LED light. "When I worked at the facility, I wasn't just a researcher. I was a test subject, one of the early volunteers for the Prometheus program." Luke felt his enhanced nervous system process this information with startling clarity. The slight irregularity in Elena's heartbeat, the way she moved with just a fraction more precision than normal human coordination should allow, the subtle electromagnetic field that surrounded her, all of it suddenly made sense. "You're enhanced. 2. Modified, yes, but not like you." Elena rolled up her sleeves, revealing arms that looked normal at first glance, but showed the same faint silver veining Luke had developed. "My enhancement was cognitive rather than physical. Improved memory, accelerated learning, enhanced pattern recognition. It's how I've been able to track the facility's activities for so many years." Tom lowered his weapon slightly, but his expression remained wary. "Elena, if you worked for them, how do we know this isn't some kind of trap? Because 15 years ago, I watched them murder my research partner when he tried to expose what we were really doing." Elena's voice carried the weight of old pain and guilt. Dr. James Crawford was the only person at that facility who still had a conscience. When he gathered evidence of the human rights violations, they made sure he had an accident in the laboratory. Luke's enhanced hearing detected the change in her heartbeat that accompanied the lie. "Elena, Dr. Crawford isn't dead, is he?" She stared at him in shock. How did you? She paused, understanding dawning in her eyes. Your enhancements include enhanced perception. He's alive, isn't he? That's how you've been getting information. About current activities at the facility. Elena nodded slowly. James has been living as a hermit in the deep desert for 15 years, but he never stopped monitoring the facility's research. He's the one who told me about the reactivation of the Prometheus program 3 days ago. The service tunnel entrance appeared exactly where Elena's map indicated, a rectangular opening cut into the cave wall and sealed with a heavy steel door. The lock was electronic, but Elena produced a keycard that looked like it had been carefully maintained despite its apparent age. Security clearance never expires if they don't know you still have it, she said with a grim smile as the lock disengaged with a soft click. The tunnel beyond was a stark contrast to the natural cave system. Smooth concrete walls, LED lighting that activated automatically as they passed motion sensors, and the kind of sterile atmosphere that spoke of air filtration systems working overtime. Luke could hear machinery humming in the distance, the electronic chatter of computer systems, and something else that made his skin crawl. Human voices, but distorted in ways that suggested the speakers weren't entirely human anymore. How many people are down here? Tom asked, his shotgun ready as they moved through the tunnel. Unknown, Elena replied. The facility was supposed to house a skeleton crew of 12, but the power consumption levels suggest much higher occupancy. Luke was trying to process the flood of sensory information when another wave of suppressed memories struck him with devastating clarity. He saw himself strapped to that same examination table, but this time he could hear the conversations around him with perfect recall. Subject L47 shows exceptional adaptation to the Chimera 7 virus. Genetic markers indicate Scandinavian and Native American heritage, which may account for the enhanced compatibility. Dr. Crawford's theoretical work was correct. Certain bloodlines show natural resistance to the viral breakdown effects. How long until we can proceed to full activation? 24 hours for the primary integration phase. Then we'll need him back for the stabilization treatments. The memory was so vivid that Luke stumbled, his hand going to the wall for support. Tom was beside him instantly, concern evident in his weathered features. Luke, what is it? They're not finished with. Luke said, his voice tight with realization. The transformation I'm experiencing, it's only the first phase. Without the stabilization treatments, my body will eventually reject the enhancement and burn out. Elena stopped walking, her face pale in the tunnel's harsh lighting. Luke, there's something else I haven't told you. The stabilization process isn't just medical treatment. It requires genetic material from other successful subjects. You're not their only success story. The implications hit Luke like a physical blow. There are others like me. At least 6, maybe more. They're being held in the facility's lower levels, used as living sources for the biological compounds needed to stabilize new subjects. Tom's grip tightened on his weapon. You mean they're farming people? Worse than that. They're keeping them barely alive, harvesting what they need, then using them to create new subjects who will eventually become sources themselves. Elena's voice was thick with revulsion. It's a self-perpetuating system of human experimentation that could continue indefinitely. Luke felt his enhanced body respond to the surge of rage that accompanied this revelation. The silver veins in his skin began to pulse with increased intensity, and he could feel his muscles tightening with barely controlled violence. Whoever these people were, whatever noble goals they might claim to serve, they had crossed lines that no human being should ever cross. How far to the main laboratory level? He asked, his voice carrying an undertone that made both Elena and Tom step back involuntarily. 1/4 mile, maybe less. But Luke, you need to understand the facility's security systems will detect us. the moment we enter the main complex. We'll have minutes at most before they activate full containment protocols. Then we better make those minutes count. Luke started walking again, his enhanced senses reaching out to map the facility ahead. Of them, he could detect at least 30 human heartbeats in the main complex, along with several others that registered as human, but with significant anomalies. The other test subjects Elena had mentioned. Behind him, Tom and Elena exchanged worried glances. Whatever Luke was becoming, the revelation about the facility's true purpose had accelerated his transformation in ways that went beyond purely physical. The quiet, thoughtful cowboy was still there, but he was being overlaid with something harder, more dangerous, something that might be necessary to survive what lay ahead, but which carried its own risks. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Luke could see a light ahead that wasn't LED, but the colder illumination of laboratory fluorescence. They were almost there. The laboratory level stretched out before them like something from a nightmare disguised as a scientific facility. Through the reinforced glass windows of the service tunnel's endpoint, Luke could see rows of examination tables, banks of monitoring equipment, and containment units that hummed with ominous purpose. The sterile white surfaces reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting, creating an environment that felt deliberately hostile to human warmth. Elena accessed another electronic lock with her ancient keycard, and the door slid open with a soft hiss of pressurized air. The smell that rolled out was one Luke would never forget, antiseptic mixed with fear, pain, and something else that his enhanced senses identified as the distinctive odor of human genetic material being artificially manipulated. "Stay low and move fast," Elena whispered. "The security cameras are motion activated, but there are blind spots between the monitoring stations." Luke's enhanced vision allowed him to see details that would have been invisible to normal eyesight. In the containment units lining the far wall, he could make out human shapes, the other test subjects Elena had mentioned. They were alive but barely conscious, their bodies bearing the same kind of modifications Luke was experiencing, but taken to extremes that bordered on the monstrous. One figure, suspended in a tank of greenish fluid, had skin that had become entirely metallic, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Another showed extensive bone and muscle restructuring that had left her nearly unrecognizable as human. All of them were connected to harvesting equipment that drew biological materials from their transformed bodies in a continuous cycle. "Dear God," Tom breathed, his weathered face pale with revulsion. Luke felt his rage building to dangerous levels. The silver veins in his skin were pulsing so rapidly they had become almost solid streams of light, and he could feel his enhanced musculature preparing for violence on a scale that would have been impossible for his human form. "Elena, where are the stabilization treatments kept?" "Central laboratory, through that airlock." She pointed to a reinforced door marked with biohazard symbols. "But Luke, the moment we open that door, every alarm in the facility will activate. Then, we better be ready to move fast." Luke tested the door's electronic lock with his transformed hand, and to his surprise, his touch seemed to interface directly with the electronic system. The silver veining in his skin was apparently more than decorative. It was some kind of biological circuitry that could interact with electronic devices. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and Luke realized his transformation had given him capabilities even Elena hadn't anticipated. "How did you do that?" she asked, staring at the open door. "I'm not entirely sure." Luke examined his hand, watching the silver patterns pulse with their own rhythm. "I think the enhancement includes some kind of technological interface capability." Tom kept his shotgun ready as they moved through the central laboratory. The space was dominated by a massive computer system that hummed with processing power, surrounded by equipment that looked more like something from science fiction than medical research. Banks of monitors displayed genetic sequences, cellular diagrams, and what appeared to be real-time biological data from the subjects in the containment units. Luke approached one of the workstations, his enhanced nervous system processing the displayed information with startling speed. What he saw there made his blood run cold. "Elena, look at this." The monitor showed a file labeled Subject L47, Phase 2 Implementation. Luke's photograph was attached to detailed biological profiles, genetic mapping, and a timeline that extended far into the future. According to the data, his current transformation was only the beginning. The researchers planned to continue modifying him over a period of years, eventually creating something that bore little resemblance to human beings. They're not trying to enhance humans, Luke realized with growing horror. They're trying to replace them. Elena studied the data with her enhanced cognitive abilities, her face growing pale as she processed the implications. This isn't about creating super soldiers or survival enhancement. It's about evolutionary replacement. They're trying to create a new species that can survive in environments that would kill normal humans. Tom moved to another workstation, his practical rancher's mind cutting through the scientific jargon to focus on immediate concerns. "Luke, according to this timeline, you've got maybe 18 hours before they expect you back for the next phase of treatment." Luke accessed another computer terminal, his biological interface allowing him to navigate the system within human speed. What he found, there was even more disturbing files on dozens of other subjects, some successful, others failures, all treated as nothing more than experimental data. "There are others," he said quietly, "not just the ones in the containment units. They've been running this program for decades, creating enhanced humans and then using them for purposes that aren't listed in any of these files." Elena joined him at the terminal, her enhanced cognitive abilities helping her process the classified information. "Luke, some of these subject files reference deployment to conflict zones, disaster areas, and—" She stopped, her face going white. "Industrial accidents. They're using enhanced humans to handle situations that would kill normal people, then covering up their involvement." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the laboratory complex, multiple sets moving, with the kind of coordination that suggested military training. Their presence had been detected despite Elena's precautions. "We've got company," Tom announced, chambering a shell in his shotgun. Luke's enhanced hearing allowed him to track the approaching personnel with precision. 6 figures, all moving with the same mechanical precision he'd observed in Agents Torres and Davidson. Enhanced humans like himself, but modified for combat rather than survival. "Elena, where are the stabilization compounds kept?" "Refrigeration unit, north wall." "But Luke, we don't have time." "Yes, we do." Luke's voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before, a confidence born of capabilities that were still revealing themselves. "Tom, can you hold them off for 2 minutes?" The old rancher's smile was grim but determined. "Son, I've been handling trouble longer than you've been breathing. Go get what you need." Luke moved toward the refrigeration unit with fluid grace, his enhanced physiology allowing him to process information and move with speed that defied normal human limitations. Behind him, he could hear Tom's shotgun boom as the first of the enhanced agents entered the laboratory. The refrigeration unit required a biometric lock, but Luke's transformed hand interfaced with the scanner in ways its designers had never anticipated. The silver veining in his palm connected directly with the electronic systems, overriding the security protocols through methods he didn't fully understand but instinctively knew how to use. Inside the unit were dozens of vials containing a fluid that looked like liquid silver. Each was labeled with subject designations and biological compatibility markers. Luke found the vials marked for L47 and stuffed them into his jacket pockets, feeling their cold weight against his ribs. Tom's voice cut through the sound of combat. "Luke, time to go." But as Luke turned toward the exit, Another door opened, and a figure he recognized from his suppressed memories stepped into the laboratory. Dr. Sarah Kellerman, the woman with silver hair who had overseen his initial transformation. She was flanked by two enhanced agents, but her attention was focused entirely on Luke. "Subject L47, she said, her voice carrying the same clinical detachment he remembered. "You're right on schedule." Luke felt the vials of stabilization compound in his pockets, the key to controlling his transformation and possibly saving his life. But between him and freedom stood a woman who had treated him like a laboratory specimen, and agents who were designed to be superior to anything human science had created before. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Luke was no longer certain which side of the human versus enhanced divide he truly belonged on. Dr. Kellerman's smile was cold and predatory as she watched Luke clutch the vials of stabilization compound. "Did you really think we weren't monitoring your every move, L47? Did you imagine that your escape from the ranch was anything other than exactly what we intended?" Luke felt the world shift beneath his feet, not from his physical transformation, but from the implications of her words. "What are you talking about?" "The burned document in your saddlebag, the convenient memory, flashes, even your meeting with Elena, all carefully orchestrated to bring you exactly where we needed you to be." Dr. Kellerman moved closer, her enhanced agents flanking her with mechanical precision. "You see, Luke, the stabilization process requires more than just chemical compounds. It requires psychological conditioning, stress responses, and most importantly, the willing participation of the subject." Elena stepped back as if she'd been struck. "That's impossible. I've been working against this facility for 15 years. Dr. Kellerman turned her attention to the librarian with something approaching amusement. "Have you, Elena? Or have you been our most valuable asset, identifying potential subjects and guiding them through the enhancement process without their knowledge?" She gestured to the computer terminals around them. "Every person you've helped over the years, every individual who sought your assistance in investigating the facility, they've all become part of our program." Luke's enhanced cognitive abilities were processing this information at accelerated speed, and the horrible truth was becoming clear. Elena's carefully preserved keycard, her detailed knowledge of the facility's layout, a convenient appearance at the line shack, all of it pointed to a level of coordination that would have been impossible without inside assistance. "Elena," Luke said quietly, his voice carrying a note of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. "Luke, I swear to you, I didn't know." Elena's enhanced cognitive abilities were allowing her to process the implications just as quickly as Luke. "But looking back, the timing of my contacts with potential subjects, the information I received about facility activities, it's all too convenient, too perfect." Tom's voice cut through the revelation from across the laboratory, where he was still engaged with the enhanced agents. "Luke, whatever's happening over there, we need to move." Dr. Kellerman activated a device on her wrist, and suddenly the gunfire from Tom's position ceased. Luke's enhanced hearing detected the old rancher's heartbeat steady but strained, suggesting he was alive, but restrained. "Double quotes, Mr. Hartwell is unharmed for now," Dr. Kellerman said. "His fate, like yours, depends on your cooperation with the final phase of your enhancement." Luke felt his rage building again, but this time it was tempered by a growing understanding of just how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. "How long, Dr. Kellerman? How long have I been part of your program?" 15 years, Luke. Since the day you first arrived in Three Pines as a drifter with no clear memory of your past." Her smile widened as she saw the shock register on his face. "Did you never wonder why your earliest memories were so vague? Why you had no family connections, no history that could be independently verified?" The laboratory seemed to spin around Luke as suppressed memories began flooding back with devastating clarity. Not memories of the past 3 days, But memories of 15 years ago, a younger version of himself volunteering for what he'd been told were medical experiments to help develop treatments for veterans suffering from PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. He saw himself signing consent forms, undergoing initial medical evaluations, and receiving treatments that were supposed to help him integrate back into civilian society after military service. But there had never been any military service, that was all. Fabricated history implanted during the initial phases of the program. You were one of our early successes, Dr. Kellerman continued. The memory implantation process worked perfectly, creating a stable identity that allowed you to function in normal society while your enhanced genetics remained dormant. Tom Hartwell wasn't just your employer. He was your handler, monitoring your development and reporting back to us on any signs of emerging capabilities. Luke turned toward where Tom was being held by the enhanced agents, his heart breaking as the truth became clear. The man he'd considered a father figure, the ranch that had felt like home, the entire life he'd built in Three Pines, all of it was an elaborate experiment in long-term psychological conditioning. Tom knew? Mr. Hartwell has been on our payroll since before you arrived in Three Pines. His job was to provide a stable environment where your enhanced genetics could develop naturally without triggering the kind of traumatic stress that had caused previous subjects to burn out prematurely. But even as Dr. Kellerman spoke, Luke's enhanced senses were detecting something that didn't match her confident narrative. Tom's heartbeat showed patterns of genuine distress and surprise, not the controlled responses of someone who had been part of a long-term deception. And there was something else fear, not for himself, but for Luke. Elena was studying Dr. Kellerman with her enhanced cognitive abilities, her face showing the kind of intense concentration that suggested she was processing information at maximum capacity. Dr. Kellerman, there's something wrong with your timeline. Luke's genetic markers show compatibility with Chimera 7, but the enhanced bloodline indicators suggest natural development, not artificial implantation. Dr. Kellerman's confident expression flickered for just a moment, but it was enough for Luke's enhanced perception to catch the tell. She was lying, or at least not telling the complete truth. What are you telling us? Luke demanded before Dr. Kellerman could respond. Another voice spoke from the laboratory's main entrance. She's not telling you that the program failed, Luke, that you're not their success, you're their only remaining hope. The man who entered the laboratory was tall and gaunt, with wild gray hair and clothes that suggested he'd been living rough for years. But his eyes held the kind of intelligence that Luke associated with Elena's enhanced cognitive abilities, and his movements carried the fluid precision of someone with enhanced physical capabilities. Dr. Crawford? Elena breathed. Hello, Elena. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. Dr. James Crawford moved into the laboratory with the confidence of someone who belonged there, despite his disheveled appearance. Dr. Kellerman, I think it's time you told L-47, told Luke the truth about why he's really here. Dr. Kellerman's enhanced agents moved to intercept Crawford, but he raised his hand and they stopped mid-motion, their bodies trembling as if fighting against some invisible force. I still have administrative override codes, Crawford explained calmly. The beauty of being the program's original architect is that you build in safeguards even your successors don't know about. Luke felt hope stirring for the first time since the revelations had begun. Dr. Crawford, what's the truth she's not telling us? Crawford's smile was grim as he looked at Dr. Kellerman. The truth is that the Prometheus program was shut down 15 years ago because it was a complete failure. Every single enhanced subject either died during the transformation process or burned out within months of completion. The facility has been maintained as a monitoring station, not an active research installation. That's impossible, Dr. Kellerman protested. The current subjects are all failures being kept alive artificially while you desperately try to reverse engineer. What went wrong? Crawford moved closer to Luke, his enhanced senses apparently evaluating the cowboy's condition. But Luke isn't one of your artificial subjects, is he, Sarah? He's something much rarer, a natural genetic anomaly that allows for stable enhancement, without artificial intervention. Luke felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with his enhanced cognitive abilities. I was never a test subject. I'm something you found and have been trying to study. Exactly. Your genetic markers suggest a bloodline that adapted naturally to environmental stressors over generations. Native American and Scandinavian heritage, specifically from populations that survived ice ages and extreme environmental conditions. When the Chimera 7 virus was introduced to your system, it didn't create artificial enhancements. It activated genetic potentials that were already present. Dr. Kellerman's facade of control was cracking. Crawford, you don't understand what you're interfering with. His genetic code could be the key to ensuring human survival in a world facing environmental collapse, nuclear contamination, and biological warfare threats. At the cost of his freedom and humanity? Crawford's voice carried the authority of someone who had once commanded respect in this facility. Sarah, 15 years ago you convinced me that we were working for the greater good. I won't make that mistake again. Luke looked around the laboratory at the containment units holding other enhanced humans, at Elena struggling with the realization that she'd been manipulated, at Tom being held by agents whose humanity had been stripped away for the sake of military efficiency. All of it represented choices, some made willingly, others imposed by force, but all carrying consequences that extended far beyond the individuals involved. The vials of stabilization compound in his pocket suddenly felt heavier, not because of their physical weight, but because of what they represented. A choice between accepting artificial control over his enhancement or risking the unknown consequences of letting his natural genetics determine his future. Dr. Crawford, Luke said, quietly, what happens if I don't take the stabilization treatments? Dr. Crawford's expression grew thoughtful as he considered Luke's question. Without the artificial stabilization treatments, your body will continue adapting based on its natural genetic programming. The process might be more unpredictable, but it would be authentically yours rather than artificially controlled. And the risks? Unknown. Your bloodline survived ice ages and environmental catastrophes that wiped out other populations, but there's no precedent for the level of enhancement you're experiencing. You could stabilize naturally, continue evolving in beneficial directions. Or, Crawford paused, his scientific honesty compelling him to complete the thought. You could burn out spectacularly, just like the artificial subjects. Dr. Kellerman stepped forward, her voice urgent. Luke, you don't understand the bigger picture. The world is facing environmental challenges that will make current conditions look mild by comparison. Climate change, nuclear contamination, biological weapons. Humanity needs individuals who can survive and thrive in hostile environments. By turning them into laboratory specimens? Luke's voice carried the kind of controlled anger that his enhanced physiology made truly dangerous. By giving them the tools to ensure the species' survival. Dr. Kellerman activated another device, and the laboratory's main computer system came online with a hum of processing power. Let me show you what we're really fighting against. The monitors around the laboratory lit up with data streams, satellite imagery, and environmental projections that painted a picture of a world in crisis. Rising radiation levels in former industrial areas, chemical contamination spreading through groundwater systems, and climate models that suggested massive population displacement within decades. This isn't science fiction, Luke. This is the world your children will inherit if we don't develop the capability to survive in hostile environments. Elena, her enhanced cognitive abilities processing the displayed data at superhuman speed, looked up from one of the workstations with a troubled expression. The projections are accurate, but incomplete. Dr. Kellerman, You're not showing him the social cost data. What social cost data? Luke asked. Elena's fingers flew over the keyboard, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to navigate the system faster than the security protocols could track. The psychological profiles of enhanced subjects, the social integration studies, the long-term stability assessments. None of them support the conclusion that enhanced humans can maintain healthy relationships or stable communities. New data appeared on the screens, and Luke felt his enhanced cognitive abilities process information that made his blood run cold. Enhanced subjects showed consistent patterns of social isolation, emotional detachment, and ultimately, a complete inability to relate to unenhanced humans as anything other than an inferior species. You're not trying to save humanity, Luke realized. You're trying to replace it. Dr. Kellerman's professional mask slipped entirely. If humanity can't adapt to survive the challenges ahead, then perhaps it deserves to be replaced by something that can. The sound of approaching vehicles reached Luke's enhanced hearing multiple engines, moving fast toward the facility. His enhanced senses identified them as military vehicles, probably carrying reinforcements for the facility's security forces. Tom's voice carried from across the laboratory, where he was still being held by the enhanced agents. Luke, whatever you're going to do, you better do it fast. We've got company coming, and they don't sound like they're here to negotiate. Dr. Crawford moved to another workstation, his fingers dancing over controls with the familiarity of someone who had designed the systems years ago. Luke, there's something else you need to understand. The facility's computer system contains detailed files on hundreds of potential subjects, people with genetic markers, similar to yours, who could be enhanced using refined versions of the Chimera 7 virus. How many people? Enough to seed a population of enhanced humans across the globe. Men, women, children, entire families in some cases. Crawford's voice was heavy with the implications. Dr. Kellerman's program isn't about creating individual super soldiers. It's about engineering a species replacement event. Luke felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. In his pockets, the vials of stabilization compound represented a choice between accepting artificial control over his enhancement and risking the unknown consequences of natural genetic evolution. But the stakes had become much larger than his personal survival. Dr. Crawford, can the facility's systems be destroyed permanently? Crawford's enhanced cognitive abilities were already analyzing the question's implications. The main computer core contains decades of research data, genetic profiles, and enhancement protocols. If it were destroyed, it would set the program back by years, possibly decades. But the knowledge exists in other locations? Some of it, yes. But the specific combination of research that makes your type of stable enhancement possible is largely contained in this facility's systems? Crawford moved to another workstation, his fingers accessing deeply buried system files. There's also an emergency protocol that would sterilize the entire underground complex, eliminating all biological samples and research materials. Dr. Kellerman's enhanced agents suddenly moved with deadly precision, but Crawford was ready for them. His administrative override codes sent conflicting signals to their control systems, causing them to freeze in place like malfunctioning robots. Sarah, you always were too dependent on technology, Crawford said calmly. The sound of military vehicles was getting closer, and Luke's enhanced senses detected the deployment of personnel around the facility's perimeter. Helicopter rotors were also approaching, at least 3 aircraft carrying what sounded like full tactical teams. Elena looked up from her workstation, her enhanced cognitive processing having analyzed the facility's defensive systems. Luke, they're not just bringing reinforcements. The tactical deployment pattern suggests they're preparing to seal the facility permanently, with all of us inside it. They can't afford to let any of us leave, Dr. Kellerman said, her professional composure cracking further. Too much classified information, too many security risks. The program is more important than any individual participants. Tom's voice carried across the laboratory with the authority of a man who had spent decades making hard decisions. Luke, son, sometimes you have to choose between what's safe and what's right. And sometimes, what's right means making sure other folks don't have to face the same choices you're facing. Luke understood. The old rancher, despite the revelations about his role in the program, was telling him to destroy the facility and everything in it, even if it meant sacrificing their own lives to prevent the creation of an enhanced human species. That would inevitably replace normal humanity. Dr. Crawford accessed the emergency sterilization protocol, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to navigate through multiple security barriers, faster than the system could implement countermeasures. Luke, the protocol requires biometric confirmation from 2 senior researchers. I can provide one authorization, but we need Dr. Kellerman's cooperation for the second. I'll never authorize the destruction of 15 years of research, Doctor, Kellerman declared. Then we'll have to find another way. Luke moved toward the central computer core, his enhanced senses detecting the electromagnetic patterns that governed the facility systems. The silver veining in his skin was responding to the electronic environment, creating connections he didn't fully understand but instinctively knew how to use. As his transformed hand made contact with the computer core's access panel, Luke felt his consciousness expand in ways that defied description. He was no longer just a man with enhanced physical capabilities. He was interfacing directly with the facility's electronic nervous system, gaining access to information and control systems that his biological enhancements allowed him to manipulate with inhuman precision. Remarkable, Dr. Crawford breathed, watching the computer displays flicker and change in response to Luke's direct interface. Your enhancement includes technological integration at a level we never imagined possible. Luke could see the entire facility's layout in his mind, every room, every system, every piece of equipment. He could also see the personnel files of everyone in the complex, including the other enhanced subjects being held in the lower levels. 6 individuals, all barely conscious, all being used as biological resources for research that treated human beings as nothing more than raw materials. Elena, can you get Tom out of here? Luke, what are you planning? I'm going to give Dr. Crawford the authorization he needs for the sterilization protocol. Luke's consciousness was spreading through the facility's systems like wildfire, overriding security protocols and accessing the deepest levels of classified data. But first, I'm going to free the other subjects. The containment unit's holding. The enhanced subjects began opening with soft hisses of released pressure. The individuals inside were barely conscious, their bodies bearing modifications that made Luke's transformation look mild by comparison. But they were alive and capable of movement. Dr. Kellerman lunged toward an emergency alarm. But one of the newly freed subjects, a woman whose skeletal structure had been enhanced to provide incredible strength, intercepted her with fluid precision. Dr. Kellerman, the enhanced woman said, her voice carrying the kind of controlled rage that only came from years of imprisonment and abuse. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Luke's interface with the computer systems deepened, allowing him to access not just the sterilization protocol, but also the facility's defensive systems. The approaching military vehicles suddenly found their electronic systems failing, their engines dying as Luke systematically disabled every piece of technology within a mile of the facility. Everyone out, Luke commanded, his voice carrying through the facility's intercom system. You have 5 minutes before I activate the sterilization protocol. Dr. Crawford was already moving toward the exit, helping Tom break free from the disabled ENFNCED agents. Elena gathered the other freed subjects, her enhanced cognitive abilities allowing her to quickly assess their conditions and guide them toward safety. Luke, Dr. Crawford called back. The protocol requires you to be outside the facility before activation. The sterilization process will kill everything organic within the complex. Luke nodded, but his enhanced consciousness was still interfaced with the facility systems, and he could feel the approaching military forces regrouping despite their electronic failures. They would be inside the complex within minutes, and if any of the research data survived, the program would simply relocate and continue. The choice was becoming clear, and it was a choice that would define not just Luke's future, but possibly the future of human evolution itself. The facility's alarms began wailing as Luke's consciousness spread deeper into the computer systems. Through the electronic networks, he could see military personnel advancing through the upper levels, their night vision equipment useless in the face of his systematic shutdown of the facility's power grid. "Luke," Elena's voice carried urgency as she helped the other enhanced subjects toward the service tunnel exit. "The military teams are using independent power sources. They'll be here in 3 minutes." Dr. Crawford was at the emergency console, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to input authorization codes faster than the security system could process them. "Luke, I need you to provide the second authorization now, or we'll lose the chance to destroy the research data permanently." But Luke's enhanced consciousness was processing information at levels that bordered on the superhuman. Through the facility sensors, he could detect 37 military personnel advancing on their position, along with 6 enhanced agents who had been held in reserve. More importantly, he could access the facility's deepest archives, where the true scope of the Prometheus program was revealed. The files showed enhancement research facilities in 7 countries, test subjects numbering in the thousands, and a timeline for global deployment that would begin within 6 months. This facility wasn't the program. It was just one small part of an international conspiracy to replace human beings with enhanced alternatives. "Dr. Crawford," Luke said, his voice carrying the electronic distortion of his computer interface. "Destroying this facility won't stop the program. It will barely slow it down. Luke, it's still the right thing to do. Every day we delay gives them more time to refine their techniques and recruit more subjects." Tom's voice cut through the chaos from near the tunnel exit. "Son, sometimes you can't save everyone, but you can make sure the fight continues." The first military team reached the laboratory level. First military team reached the laboratory level. Their enhanced equipment allowing them to operate despite Luke's electronic warfare. They moved with tactical precision, but Luke's interface with the facility systems gave him capabilities they couldn't have anticipated. Emergency containment barriers slammed shut between the military teams and the fleeing enhanced subjects. Luke rerouted the facility's life support systems, filling the upper levels with inert gas that would incapacitate normal humans without permanent harm. And through it all, his consciousness continued expanding, accessing systems and data networks that extended far beyond the physical facility. "I can see their entire network," Luke said, his voice now carrying harmonics that suggested his vocal cords were being modified in real time. "Dr. Crawford, if I stay interfaced with the system during sterilization, I can trace their data connections and upload a virus that will destroy their research worldwide. Luke, the sterilization protocol will kill you. The electromagnetic pulse alone will fry your nervous system, enhanced or not. Maybe my enhancements will allow me to survive it." Luke could feel his body continuing to change, the silver veining spreading throughout his nervous system and creating connections that seemed designed for exactly this kind of technological integration. Either way, it's the only chance to stop them completely. Dr. Kellerman, still restrained by the enhanced woman who had been freed from containment, spoke with desperate urgency. "Luke, you don't understand what you're destroying. The research. Data represents humanity's best hope for surviving the environmental catastrophes ahead. No, Luke replied, his enhanced consciousness processing environmental data from around the globe. It represents the destruction of everything that makes U.S. human in the name of survival. Elena had reached the tunnel exit but turned back toward the laboratory. Luke, there has to be another way. Your genetic anomaly could be studied without the forced enhancement program, without the human rights violations. Elena, they've had decades to find ethical approaches to this research. Instead, they chose to treat human beings as experimental subjects and biological resources. Luke's interface with the computer system deepened, allowing him access to classified files that detailed the full scope of the program's atrocities. There are children in some of these facilities, Elena. Children taken from their families and enhanced against their will. The military teams had bypassed Luke's containment measures and were advancing on the laboratory with weapons designed specifically for enhanced targets. Through the facility's sensors, Luke could see their ammunition bioelectric rounds that would disrupt his nervous system and force him to disconnect from the computer interface. Everyone out, now. Luke commanded through the intercom system. Dr. Crawford, input your authorization code. Crawford's enhanced reflexes allowed him to complete the authorization sequence in seconds. The computer system immediately began requesting the second authorization, and Luke felt the weight of decision settling over him like a physical presence. Tom's voice reached him from the tunnel entrance, carrying the kind of paternal authority that had shaped Luke's identity for 5 years. Luke, whatever happens next, know that you've been like a son to me. The ranch, the work we did together, that was real, no matter what these people say about programs and handlers. Luke felt tears on his face as his enhanced consciousness prepared to merge completely with the facility's systems. Whatever Tom's original role in the program had been, the man's genuine affection and respect were unmistakable. That relationship, at least, had transcended the artificial circumstances of its creation. I know, Tom. Thank you. The military teams were at the laboratory entrance, their bioelectric weapons charging with audible whines. Luke had seconds to complete the authorization and activate the sterilization protocol, but doing so would require him to remain interfaced with the system as it destroyed itself and everything connected to it. Luke's hand pressed against the biometric scanner as the military team breached the laboratory entrance. The second authorization registered instantly, and the facility's sterilization protocol activated with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the complex. Sterilization sequence initiated. The computer announced in its emotionless synthetic voice. All personnel must evacuate immediately. Electromagnetic pulse discharge in 90 seconds. The bioelectric weapons fired in a coordinated volley. Their specialized ammunition designed to disrupt enhanced nervous systems. But Luke's transformation had progressed beyond what the weapons designers had anticipated. The silver veining in his body absorbed and redirected the electrical discharge, using it to deepen his connection with the facility's systems rather than disrupting it. Through his electronic interface, Luke felt his consciousness expanding across global data networks, tracing the connections between this facility and the other research installations worldwide. His enhanced cognitive abilities processed terabytes of information in seconds, identifying target systems and preparing the viral programs that would destroy decades of enhancement research. Luke, Dr. Crawford's voice reached him from the tunnel. Entrance. You have 1 minute to disconnect and get out. But Luke was beyond physical limitations now. His consciousness existed as much in the electronic networks as in his biological brain, and he could feel the viral programs propagating through classified data systems on 6 continents. Research facilities in Russia, China, Europe, and South America were experiencing catastrophic system failures as his electronic assault destroyed their databases and corrupted their genetic research. The military teams were retreating from the laboratory as emergency klaxons wailed throughout the complex. Their enhanced equipment was failing in the face of the building electromagnetic field that would soon discharge with enough power to sterilize every biological organism within the facility. 60 seconds to discharge, the computer announced. Dr. Kellerman broke free from her restraints and lunged toward a manual override console. But the enhanced woman who had been held in containment intercepted her with inhuman speed. "Doctor," the woman said, her voice carrying years of accumulated rage, "your research ends today." Through his global network interface, Luke could see the scope of his electronic assault. 7 major research facilities were going offline permanently, their decades of accumulated data being systematically destroyed. Thousands of genetic profiles were being corrupted beyond recovery. Enhancement protocols were being replaced with randomized data that would take years to untangle. But the effort was consuming his biological resources at a rate that his enhanced physiology could barely sustain. He could feel his nervous system burning out, neural pathways overloading as they tried to process information flows that no human brain was designed to handle. 45 seconds to discharge. Tom's voice carried across the laboratory one last time. "Luke, you've done enough. Come with us." Luke wanted to respond, wanted to tell the old rancher that he'd found peace in knowing that their relationship had been real despite the artificial circumstances of its creation. But his consciousness was too deeply integrated with the electronic systems to form words through his biological vocal cords. Instead, he opened the facility's intercom system one final time. "Tom, Alana, everyone get clear of the complex. The electromagnetic pulse will have a wider range than the computer estimates." Through the facility's external sensors, Luke could see his friends and the other enhanced subjects reaching the cave system that would provide protection from the coming electromagnetic discharge. They would survive, and they would carry the truth of what had happened here to the outside world. 30 seconds to discharge. The military teams had cleared the upper levels, their retreat hampered by Luke's continued interference with their electronic systems. Several enhanced agents had been caught in the facility's lower levels when the lockdown protocols activated, and Luke felt no remorse as he sealed their fate along with his own. Dr. Kellerman made one final desperate attempt to reach an emergency communicator, but the enhanced subjects who had been freed from containment prevented her escape. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, the necessity of ensuring that this particular research program ended permanently. 15 seconds to discharge. Luke's viral programs had reached their final targets, backup research facilities in Antarctica and Australia that had been hidden even deeper in the classified archives. As those systems went offline, he felt a sense of completion that transcended his physical circumstances. The Prometheus program was finished. The enhancement research that had treated human beings as experimental subjects was destroyed, and the data that would have enabled the creation of an enhanced species to replace normal humans was corrupted beyond recovery. 5 seconds to discharge. Luke disconnected from his biological nervous system, existing now as pure consciousness within the facility's electronic networks. He felt no pain as the electromagnetic pulse built to critical levels, no fear as the sterilization field prepared to destroy everything organic within the complex. Instead, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had made the choice to remain human, to protect humanity from those who would replace it with something that might be stronger, faster, and more resilient, but would no longer possess the essential qualities that made human life worth preserving. Electromagnetic pulse discharge in 3.2.1. The world went white. The explosion lit up the high desert sky like a second sunrise, visible for 50 miles in every direction. Tom Hartwell watched from the rocky outcrop where they'd taken shelter, his weathered face reflecting the brilliant light that marked The end of the facility that had defined so much of his life and Luke's. When the electromagnetic pulse finally dissipated, the silence was profound. No hum of machinery, no electronic chatter, no signs of life from the complex that had been hidden beneath the desert floor for decades. Is it over? Elena asked, her enhanced cognitive abilities still processing the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Dr. Crawford, his scientific training warring with the emotional impact of losing someone who had become more than just another research subject, consulted a radiation detector that had somehow survived the pulse. The sterilization was complete. Nothing organic could have survived that electromagnetic discharge. Tom started walking toward the smoking crater that marked the facility's former location, his steps heavy with grief and purpose. The others followed Elena, Dr. Crawford, and the 6 enhanced subjects who had been freed from their containment units. They moved like mourners approaching a grave, which in many ways they were. The crater was nearly 100 yards across, its glassy bottom still radiating heat from the intensity of the sterilization field of the underground complex that had housed decades of research. Nothing remained but fused sand and twisted metal. The electromagnetic pulse had been so powerful that even the deepest levels had been scoured clean of any biological traces. "He's gone," Tom said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a father's grief. But as they stood at the crater's edge, Elena's enhanced senses detected something the others had missed: a faint electromagnetic signature emanating from the center of the destruction. It was weak, almost indistinguishable from background radiation, but it carried patterns that suggested organization, intention, perhaps even consciousness. "Dr. Crawford," she said softly, "your scanner, what's it showing? For electromagnetic activity?" Crawford consulted his instrument, his enhanced cognitive abilities processing the readings with growing astonishment. "There's definitely organized electromagnetic activity in the crater. The patterns are complex, almost like neural activity," Elena finished. "Luke didn't die in the pulse. He merged with it." As if responding to their recognition, the electromagnetic patterns in the crater grew stronger, more coherent. The glassy sand at the center began to glow with the same silver light that had characterized Luke's enhanced biology. And slowly, a figure began to coalesce from the energy field itself. Luke's form was translucent, more energy than matter, but undeniably present. The silver veining that had marked his transformation now existed as pure light, creating patterns that pulsed with gentle luminescence. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in their minds rather than through their ears. "I'm sorry I worried you," he said, his tone carrying the same gentle humor that had characterized the man they'd known. "But I'm still here. Just different." Tom stepped forward, his practical rancher's mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Luke, is it really you?" "It's me, Tom. Still your ranch hand. Still grateful for everything you taught me about loyalty and integrity." Luke's energy form flickered as he spoke, as if maintaining cohesion required conscious effort. "But I'm also something new now, connected to electronic networks worldwide, able to monitor and prevent any attempts to restart the enhancement programs." Dr. Crawford approached the edge of the crater, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. "Luke, what happened during the electromagnetic pulse?" "I became something the program's designers never anticipated, a successful fusion of biological consciousness with electronic systems. My enhanced genetics allowed me to survive the transition, but I can't return to purely biological existence." Elena's enhanced cognitive abilities were processing the implications of Luke's transformation. "You're going to continue monitoring for enhancement research, aren't you?" Luke's luminous form nodded, the silver pattern shifting like liquid light. "There are other facilities, other researchers who will try to restart similar programs. But now they'll have to contend with someone who understands both the technology and the ethical implications of what they're attempting. The 6 enhanced subjects who had been freed from the facility gathered around the crater's edge, their own modifications having stabilized in the hours since their release. They looked more human now, the extreme alterations beginning to normalize as their bodies adapted without artificial intervention. "What about us?" one of them asked, the woman whose strength enhancements had allowed her to restrain Dr. Kellerman. "What do we do with what we've become?" Luke's energy form grew brighter, as if drawing power from the connection with others who shared his enhanced heritage. "You have a choice that I no longer have. You can try to live normal lives, using your abilities to help people without drawing attention to yourselves. Or you can work with Dr. Crawford and Elena to help other enhanced individuals who might be discovered in the future." Tom removed his hat, running his fingers through his gray hair as he processed the extraordinary situation. "Luke, the rancher room is still there. Your things. Are you ever coming back?" "I can visit, Tom. Not in the same way, but I can manifest anywhere there's electronic infrastructure. The ranch has power lines, internet connections. I can be present there whenever you need me." Elena stepped forward, her enhanced perception detecting the effort it took for Luke to maintain his coherence.